If you're looking for a way to really get a handle on the intense political and financial arguments shaping policy in the Gambia right now, well, you've come to the right place.
Absolutely.
Today we're diving into a pretty comprehensive and I have to say quite fiery rebuttal from the APP-Sobea political alliance.
Yeah, that's right. And this isn't just, your standard political back and forth. It's a really specific, very detailed document.
hmm
And it takes direct aim at the information minister, Dr. Ceesay. It challenges not just his defense of the budget, but also, well, his credibility and his tactics.
Right. And just for context, APP-Sobea is a major opposition coalition. So the source material we're looking at is basically their formal challenge to the 2026 budget proposal. They're putting it all out there.
Exactly. Forensically, almost.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We're going to unpack what this opposition group is calling fiscal distortion and political deflection. We'll focus on their argument, using the government's own numbers they cite, that the debt metrics and funding priorities are, well, seriously misplaced. It's about getting past the political spin.
Right. Finding those cold, hard figures, as they put it, trying to see where the money is really going, according to this rebuttal.
So this deep dive should help you understand the weight of the numbers being thrown around and why the opposition is using terms like generational sabotage.
Pretty strong language.
It is. Okay, so let's start with the political strategy. Because interestingly, the opposition, they don't jump straight into the spreadsheets. They start by, well, trying to pare down the messenger.
Hmm.
The rebuttal hits hard against the minister, accusing him of personal attacks, ad hominem arguments against the APP-Sobea leader, Essa Mbai, including a really inflammatory claim that Fall is mentally unsound.
Yeah, and what's quite interesting there is how the source immediately tries to frame the minister's entire defense as just cynical distraction. Well, the rebuttal states very clearly something like labeling your critic isn't a substitute for a credible policy defense. They're basically saying to the public, ignore the insults. Look at why he's supposedly avoiding the substance.
But the attack on his credibility, it goes beyond just, bad debating tactics, right? They bring up his own history.
They do. They really leverage his ideological past against him.
What's the specific claim they highlight there about his past statements?
Well, the source makes a pretty striking point. It says that before Dr. Ceesay got his current job as minister, he actually publicly stated that the very president he now works for, well, that he lacked the pedigree to lead the country.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a statement to have on record.
It is.
So how does the opposition use that history now to undermine his current arguments about the budget?
Well, they paint it as this huge ideological flip-flop, moving from being a harsh critic to a staunch defender.
A move they claim is just political convenience.
Exactly. That's their argument. And they say this fundamentally erodes public trust in anything he says now about the budget.
Ah, I see.
It sort of sets this precedent, like, if he could change his mind so drastically about the leader, why should anyone trust his defense of the nation's finances now?
That makes sense. It kind of reframes the whole debate. It's not just policy disagreement anymore. It's about political sincerity.
Precisely. And that context is really key because it fuels their whole narrative of fiscal distortion.
Okay, so that brings us to where the politics meets the financial reality, the numbers. The core issue here seems to be the debt servicing costs projected for 2026.
Yes, this is where it gets really serious.
Yeah.
Essa Mbai had apparently flagged this earlier, the unsustainable nature of the debt. And this rebuttal comes back with, the stark figures from the government's own documents to back that up.
Okay, give us those core numbers. What are we actually looking at for 2026 debt payments?
The budget earmarks D13.46 billion, just for servicing existing debt.
13.46 billion.
And get this, D6.89 billion of that, more than half, is just for interest payments. That's money that just vanishes, doesn't even touch the principal amount owed.
That sounds like a massive amount, but put it in context, what percentage of the total spending plan is that D13.46 billion?
It's 31%.
Yeah.
Almost a third of the total anticipated expenditure, which is D59.3 billion.
31%.
Yeah. And the source material actually references the Standard newspaper's analysis on this. They basically said, look, for every 3 Dalasses the government plans to spend, 1 Dalassi is immediately gone, just paying off past debts.
So what does that actually mean on the ground?
It means nearly a third of the country's annual revenue is spoken for before you can even think about funding new schools or roads or, basic services. It's a huge constraint on any future development.
Let's talk about the growth rate, too, because that seems to paint a picture of things getting worse, fast. The source contrasts debt growth with overall budget growth.
Yeah, the comparison is pretty stark. Debt servicing costs are projected to jump from D11.02 billion in 2025 up to that D13.46 billion in 2026.
Okay, that's a 22% increase in 1 year.
22%. And how does that compare to the overall budget increase?
Well, that's the kicker. The total national budget is only set to grow by 12% in that same time frame.
Ah, so the cost of servicing old debt is rising almost twice as fast as the government's overall spending power.
Exactly. That's the unsustainable trend they're pointing to. It signals a serious problem.
Right. And this leads to a crucial political point, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When the minister was asked about this surge, what was his explanation?
His explanation, according to the rebuttal, was that the rise was solely due to the depreciation of the dalasi, the currency.
Okay, and why is that specific explanation seen as politically convenient by the opposition?
Well, if you blame currency depreciation, you're essentially blaming an external economic force, right? Something seemingly outside the administration's direct control, like bad weather.
Gotcha, shifting the blame.
Precisely. The opposition argues it's a deliberate deflection. They say the real reason for the increase is exactly what Fowl warned about: wasteful spending and uncontrolled borrowing. So internal choices, not just external factors.
Yes. And blaming the dalasi conveniently ignores the administration's own fiscal decisions, like their plan to borrow another D7.6 billion domestically in 2026 alone. So, you see, the opposition frames this debt not just as an economic issue, but as a ticking time bomb built by specific political choices, not just bad luck.
That sets up the next section perfectly, this claim of generational sabotage. The argument is that this focus on debt is actively starving sectors crucial for developing the country's human capital.
Yeah, the numbers they present show a really shocking imbalance, or at least that's their interpretation.
How so?
Well, while things like the government wage bill ballooned to D10.3 billion and subsidies hit D8 billion, look at what's allocated to the pillars of human development: education, health, agriculture. They're comparatively small.
Okay, let's break those down. What are the allocations they highlight?
Education gets D5.91 billion. That's about 13% of the budget. Health gets D3.14 billion, only 7%.
Only 7% for health.
And agriculture, which is critical for food security anywhere, gets just D1.77 billion. That's only 4% of the total budget.
Right, let's connect that back to the debt figure we talked about earlier. If you add up education, health, and agriculture, what's the total?
The combined total for those three vital sectors is D10.82 billion.
Okay, D10.82 billion for those three. Compared
to the D2.64 billion more on paying past debts than on funding education, health, and agriculture combined.
That's the disparity, yes. And that specific comparison is the absolute crux of their generational sabotage argument.
I see.
They're essentially saying that money, which should be building the future, educating kids, ensuring people are healthy, securing food supply, is instead being diverted to pay for past liabilities accrued through what they call reckless stewardship.
And given the Gambia's young population.
Exactly. The median age is only 19. So sacrificing these key sectors, in their view, is literally sacrificing the future prospects of the vast majority of Gambians. And the rebuttal also criticizes the specific choices made regarding austerity, right? They mention cuts to health and agriculture specifically.
Yes, they point out that the administration chose to tighten the belt in health and agriculture sectors they call the lifeline of any country, instead of finding savings elsewhere.
Why is that choice framed as so damaging politically?
Because, according to the opposition, choosing to cut the services that directly impact people's daily lives and well-being, rather than tackling the root cause of the debt, which they claim is that uncontrolled spending and borrowing it, shows a fundamental lack of care.
A disconnect.
A disconnect, yeah. It highlights a painful trade-off where investing in people seems less important than maintaining perhaps other spending patterns or servicing that debt load.
Okay, let's zoom in on a very specific example they use of alleged misrepresentation. This one targets that young population directly, funding for the Ministry of Youths and Sports.
Right. The allocation for 2026 is D146.5 million. The opposition calls this a woeful pittance.
And in percentage terms?
Just 0.34% of the total budget.
0.34%. For a country where, as you said, the median age is 19.
Yeah, roughly 70% of the population is young. So that tiny percentage obviously drew a lot of criticism.
And Minister Ceesay tried to counter this?
He did. He publicly claimed there was an additional D70 million available for youth and sports coming from specific sport levies.
Okay, additional funds, but the opposition didn't just disagree, did they? They used stronger language.
Much stronger. They labeled it a deliberate and flagrant falsehood.
Why? Why is that claim of an extra D70 million supposedly impossible, fiscally speaking, under Gambian law? We need to understand this concept of the consolidated fund they mention.
Right. This is a key technical point they make. The consolidated fund is basically the government's main bank account. Everything flows into it.
All taxes, fees, levies.
Everything, including the sport levies the minister mentioned. By law, all government revenue goes into this single central fund. There aren't separate pots of money, no hidden accounts or slush funds for specific ministries derived from levies.
So that D146.5 million figure listed in the budget documents, the one the opposition is calling a pittance.
That figure already represents the total amount Parliament is being asked to approve for the ministry, drawing from that central consolidated fund. It already includes any money expected from those sport levies.
Ah, okay. So the money isn't additional at all. It's already accounted for in the main budget line.
Precisely. According to the rebuttal, by claiming the D70 million was additional, the minister was essentially inventing a funding source that doesn't legally exist in that separate way.
And the opposition's motive for him doing that?
They argue it was a calculated move, specifically designed to mislead the youth population, to make the funding seem larger than it is, and to deflect criticism about neglecting sports infrastructure and youth programs.
So this shifts the argument again, doesn't it? From maybe poor allocation choices to potentially active deception.
Exactly. That's the distinction they're drawing. It's incredibly important to their overall case against the minister's credibility.
It frames it as him trying to placate this huge, politically important youth demographic with what they call a fiscal fairy tale.
That's the term they use, yeah.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together then. We've got the huge debt servicing figure, 31% of spending. We've got the cuts to essential sectors like health and agriculture. And we've got this specific allegation about misleading youth funding numbers. So the APP-Sub-A Alliance, they're packaging all of this as an indictment, basically, of the government's reckless stewardship.
Yes, and they're calling for what they term a fiscal awakening, urging citizens, urging you listening, to look past the political theater and examine the actual figures.
So at the end of the day, what does the source material argue is needed?
Accountability. That's the core message.
Right.
They demand transparent accounting, more prudent borrowing, and crucially, a budget that actually prioritizes long-term investment in people and human capital rather than just managing spiraling debt and short-term political goals.
They basically want the public to reject the playground insults and fiscal fairy tales, as they put it, and demand change based on verifiable data.
That's the call to action.
It's interesting how this whole debate plays out on two levels, isn't it? You have the complex, maybe hard-to-grasp financial data, like that 22% debt growth versus 12% budget growth.
Right, the wonky stuff.
Yeah. And then you have the much simpler, high-drama political narrative, the minister's alleged flip-flop, the accusations of deliberate falsehoods about youth funding, things that are easier to latch onto.
Absolutely. And that really leads to the final thought we should probably leave you with. It's about how information works in politics today.
Go on.
Well, consider this. If the opposition is successful in convincing the public that the minister isn't credible, that he's engaged in opportunism or falsehoods, does that automatically mean the public will reject all the financial arguments he makes, even the parts that might reflect some unavoidable economic realities?
That's a really interesting question. Does discrediting the messenger discredit the entire message, even the factual parts?
Or, put another way, in this kind of intense political fight, which is ultimately more powerful in actually driving policy change, is it the complex reality presented by the numbers which takes effort to understand?
Or is it the simpler, more emotionally resonant story of political betrayal, convenience, and maybe even deceit? What stands out more to you when you see these debates unfold?